He slammed her ID to the ground and sneered, "People like you disappear every day." In the lobby of a federal building, a decorated black woman stood frozen under his gaze. Humiliated, threatened, erased in plain sight. What he didn't know was chilling. She wasn't just any woman. She was the FBI director. Before we continue this powerful story, let us know where you're watching from. If you like stories like this, subscribe to the channel because tomorrow we have another powerful story that you won't want to miss. The sky over Philadelphia carried a soft gray, the kind of morning that masked both promise and threat. Alina Davis walked with a steady stride toward the Federal Bureau of Investigation's field office. She wore no tailored suit, no badge on display, no escort of aides or agents. Just a plain navy blouse, slacks, and a leather bag slung over her shoulder. To the world, she could have been another woman with business inside. To herself, this was deliberate. This was a test. For weeks, whispers had reached her desk in Washington. Complaints, not formal reports, because those were easier to bury, but quiet notes, anonymous letters, strained conversations with employees too nervous to say more. They all spoke of a climate within the Philadelphia office, one of arrogance, exclusion, hostility at the very doors where justice was supposed to begin. Alina had spent her career walking into places where she was told she did not belong, where her presence itself was a disruption. Today she would walk in again, this time without the shield of title or recognition. She wanted to see what others faced when no one knew they had power behind them. The building rose ahead, glass and steel in rigid lines. Federal emblems gleamed on the facade, but they did little to soften the coldness. At the entrance, a metal detector, a scanner, and 2 guards in uniform created the first barrier. One of them, a younger officer, looked bored, his attention drifting. The other, taller, with a frame hardened by years behind a desk and authority, leaned forward with narrowed eyes. This was Samuel Thompson. 15 years on the job had carved grooves into his face that spoke more of bitterness than wisdom. He had once been commended for diligence, but now clung to his post as if it were the last shred of relevance. Power, for him, was measured in the small humiliations he could dispense on any given day. His gaze sharpened as Alina stepped up. White men in suits had passed just minutes before, their badges waved, their jokes accepted, their steps unbroken. A woman with pearl earrings and a briefcase had been greeted with a smile. No one else was stopped, no one else was questioned beyond the routine. But as Alina approached, Thompson's shoulders stiffened. His eyes scanned her from head to toe with a suspicion that had nothing to do with protocol. "Hold it right there!" he barked, hand raised as though she were already guilty of something unspoken. The sharpness of his tone turned heads. The younger officer glanced up, uncertain, but said nothing. "CP." Alina paused, her face composed, her breath steady. She had expected this. She had lived this. Still, the sting of being singled out, the invisible line drawn by someone who believed she was lesser, cut deep. She did not show it. She never did. Instead, she placed her bag gently on the counter and said in a calm voice, "Good morning." Thompson did not answer. He leaned closer, squinting as if he could read deceit etched into her skin. "Identification," Thompson demanded, the word more an accusation than a request. Alina reached into her bag and retrieved her government-issued ID. She held it out with the same steady hand that had once signed warrants against organized crime figures and international traffickers. But here, in this lobby, it was nothing but plastic in his eyes. He snatched it, glanced once, then let out a scoff. "This expired?" His tone dripped with mockery, though the date was clearly visible. He didn't look for confirmation, the insult was the point. Behind her, a line formed. 2 men in gray suits shifted impatiently, their badges already in hand. Thompson waved them forward without so much as a glance at their documents. They breezed past, throwing sympathetic but hurried looks at Alina. One mouthed an awkward apology, as if ashamed of what they had witnessed, but too constrained by silence to intervene. Alina stood still, her body calm, her heart measured. Years of service had trained her not to react to provocation, but the memory of countless younger women, interns, analysts, even seasoned agents, flashed through her mind. How many had been forced to swallow the same bitterness in this very place? "I ask you a question," Thompson pressed, shoving the ID back across the counter. His eyes narrowed, not at the words on the card, but at the woman before him. "What exactly is your business here?" The phrasing wasn't protocol. He was not asking for routine clearance. He was probing for a way to deny her. "I have business with the Bureau," Alina replied evenly. Thompson chuckled, shaking his head. "Business with the Bureau? That's cute. You know this is a federal building, right? You don't just walk in because you feel like it." The younger officer shifted again, eyes flicking nervously from Thompson to Alina. There was discomfort there, but no courage. Alina noted it. Silence often became complicity, and complicity was the quiet rot in institutions meant to serve the public. At that moment, a group of white women entered, badges dangling on lanyards. Thompson's face broke into a grin. "Morning, ladies," he greeted warmly, ushering them past without question. They smiled politely and moved through. The contrast was glaring. Alina's jaw tightened, but her voice remained calm. "Are you finished, officer?" The use of his title was deliberate, a reminder that respect, once offered, could also reveal the lack of it when withheld. Thompson leaned back in his chair, smirking as if enjoying a private show of dominance. "Not until I say I'm finished." The lobby had grown quiet. Eyes darted from one side to the other, strangers registering that something unjust was happening, but unwilling to step in. That silence, that calculation to avoid involvement, pressed against the walls like a suffocating weight. Alina picked up her ID and slid it back into her wallet with unhurried precision. Her every movement declared control, even in the face of insult. "Then I'll wait," she said simply, folding her hands in front of her. Minutes stretched. Thompson seemed to savor the delay, glancing occasionally at the line that was now forming again. Each time someone new approached, he would wave them past quickly, returning to his scrutiny of Alina. His message was clear. He had chosen her as the target, and she would not be allowed the same courtesy as the rest. A man in his 60s, wearing the suit of a longtime bureaucrat, leaned toward her with a whisper meant to console but only deepen the wound. "Don't take it personal," he murmured. "That's just how he is." Then he moved on, cleared without hesitation. Alina felt the weight of those words. Don't take it personal. But it was personal. Every barrier built on assumptions about her face, her skin, her presence. It had always been personal. Thompson finally spoke again. "So, Alina Davis," he said, rolling her name slowly as though tasting something he didn't like. "Where exactly are you heading? Who exactly do you think you are?" Her answer was measured, stripped of any detail that would give away her true position. "That's not information I'm required to share with you." His eyebrows shot up. "Not required? You think you make the rules here?" He leaned in, lowering his voice so only she could hear. "People like you should learn quick. This is my post, my rules." It was not the first time she had heard words like these, but hearing them in the entryway of the very institution sworn to protect justice, carved deeper than she let show. The younger officer cleared his throat softly, perhaps an attempt to intervene, but Thompson shot him a glare that froze him in place. A silence spread again, heavier than before. Alina could feel the weight of eyes on her, witnesses who might never speak but who would carry the memory of this moment. She remained unmoved, her composure unshaken. Her stillness was her defiance. Finally, with exaggerated reluctance, Thompson pushed a visitor badge across the counter. "Fine, go on in," he muttered, "but don't think for a second you're above being checked." Alina picked up the badge, her expression unreadable. She slid it onto her blouse and walked through the detector, her steps firm, her back straight. To anyone watching, it may have looked like another small victory of passage. To Alina, it was confirmation. The rot she had suspected was not hidden in files or whispers alone. It was at the very door. Behind her, Thompson settled back in his chair with a smug grin, unaware of who she truly was, unaware that the test he thought he had controlled was in fact his own. Alina walked deeper into the building, her mind already working. This was only the beginning. The metal detector beeped as Alina stepped through, though her belongings had already been scanned without issue. Thompson's lips curved into a grin that carried no warmth. He motioned her back with a sharp flick of his hand, as if summoning a disobedient child. "Empty your bag," he ordered, his voice raised enough for those in line to hear. "Everything on the table, right now." The demand was unusual. He had let a half-dozen people pass in the last 10 minutes without so much as unzipping a case. Still, his tone left no room for negotiation. Alina placed her leather bag on the counter and began to open it, her movements measured, deliberate. She laid out her notebook, her pen, her phone, and a slim folder. "Dump it," Thompson snapped. "All of it, purse too. Let's see what you're hiding." A hush fell over the lobby. Heads turned. Two interns, no older than 22, whispered to each other as they stepped aside to watch. A man in a tailored suit shifted uncomfortably, his eyes darting between Alina and the guard, but he kept silent. Alina reached into her purse and placed her items carefully on the counter. Lip balm, keys, a wallet, each object set down with a quiet precision that seemed to defy the spectacle Thompson was creating. But Thompson wasn't satisfied. He reached across the counter, snatched her wallet and flipped it open with unnecessary force. Her identification card slid free, clattering onto the polished floor. He didn't bother to pick it up. Gasps whispered around the room as the plastic card skidded across the tile. Alina's eyes followed it, then she bent slowly, her every movement controlled, her posture unbroken. She picked up the ID and held it in her hand, her dignity intact, even as humiliation burned hot in the space around her. Thompson smirked, arms crossed. "Yeah, figures. People like you are always trying to sneak in somewhere you don't belong." His words were loud, designed to echo off the walls. The phrase hung in the air, thick and poisonous. "People like you." Alina straightened, her eyes steady, her breathing calm. She looked directly at him and asked, her voice sharp enough to slice through the silence, "People like me?" The words reverberated, cutting deeper than any raised voice. The lobby froze, the weight of the moment pressing down on everyone present. Thompson shifted, not expecting the firmness of her reply. His smirk faltered for just a second before returning. "You heard me," he muttered, though less confidently. "Don't act like you don't know." Alina didn't answer immediately. Her silence was a power in itself, a refusal to let his prejudice dictate the narrative. She began to gather her belongings one item at a time, placing them carefully back into her bag. Each movement carried the quiet defiance of someone who had endured this all her life and refused to give the aggressor the satisfaction of seeing her break. The lobby remained heavy with unspoken words. The younger officer coughed nervously, as though attempting to intervene, but his voice came out thin. "Sir, maybe that's enough. She's cleared the scan." Thompson silenced him with a glare. "I'll decide what's enough." He turned back to Alina, his eyes narrowing with a predator's satisfaction. "What do you even think you're here for? You don't exactly fit the look of someone who belongs in these halls." There it was again. Belonging. As though justice had a dress code written in skin tones and power suits. A whisper rippled through the crowd. "Is she an agent?" someone murmured. Another voice replied, "Doesn't look like it, maybe staff." The words weren't meant to wound, but they carried the sting of assumption all the same. Alina adjusted her bag strap, her eyes never leaving Thompson's. "You've had your look, are we done?" He chuckled, shaking his head. "Done? Not yet. I want to make sure we don't have any surprises. Step aside." He pointed to a spot in the open space of the lobby. "Stand there while I finish going through this." It was a deliberate staging, a public display meant to diminish her, to mark her as suspect before the eyes of every passerby. She walked to the spot, each step deliberate, each movement carrying a weight of defiance disguised as compliance. Thompson rummaged through her belongings, shuffling papers with no real purpose. He dropped her pen on the floor, then her notebook. Each time she stooped to pick them up, her motions calm, refusing to betray irritation. The audience in the lobby grew still, captivated by the imbalance of power playing out before them. Then she reached out a hand to a flame, hell and the freaks. Then, in a voice meant to be heard by all, Thompson said, "See, this is why we have security. People like this think they can just walk in unchecked, always trying to slide by, always looking for an angle." Alina's voice answered before anyone else could breathe. "And what angle would that be, officer?" The question struck him harder than he expected. His jaw worked as he searched for a response. "You know exactly what I mean." "No," she replied, her voice firm, echoing in the stillness. "I want you to explain it. To everyone here." She gestured slightly toward the crowd, now watching in silence. "What do people like me mean to you?" The tension cracked like a whip. A few people lowered their eyes, unwilling to meet hers. Others leaned forward, curious and uneasy. Thompson's face reddened, but he offered no explanation. His authority, once bolstered by silence, was crumbling beneath the weight of her question. She didn't move, didn't flinch, didn't break. The words "people like me" now hung not as his accusation but as her challenge. The silence stretched until it became unbearable. Finally, a woman in line, an analyst with tired eyes and a visitor badge of her own, shifted forward. She didn't speak, but her expression carried solidarity, a quiet nod in Alina's direction. Others followed, subtle gestures that broke the isolation Thompson had tried to force upon her. Alina let the moment settle. Then she walked back to the counter, her movements steady. She picked up her remaining belongings from where Thompson had scattered them. Her bag closed with a quiet snap that sounded louder than any outburst. "Are you finished humiliating yourself, officer?" she asked, her tone calm, unshaken. The younger guard's head jerked upward, startled by the shift. Thompson's mouth opened, then closed again, the words choking somewhere between pride and uncertainty. His grip on the moment was slipping, unraveling in front of the very people he sought to impress. Alina adjusted the visitor badge, now clipped neatly to her blouse. She stood taller, her presence commanding in its quiet strength. "Because I am finished giving you this stage," she said, turning toward the hallway that led deeper into the building. Whispers erupted again, sharper this time, no longer just about her but about him. "That was unnecessary," someone muttered. "He went too far," another whispered. Thompson's smirk had vanished. He sat rigid, hands gripping the edge of the counter as though anchoring himself to the last shred of authority he still held. The younger officer shifted uncomfortably, glancing between Alina's retreating figure and his superior's stiff posture. Alina did not look back. Her stride carried her forward, every step a declaration. She had endured the humiliation, but she had not broken. And in refusing to break, she had turned the spotlight away from herself and onto the man who had orchestrated it. Inside, though, she felt the weight, not of his words, those she had carried all her life, but of the silence of those around her. Silence that had allowed his words to echo unchecked until she forced the air to shift. She carried that silence with her as she stepped deeper into the heart of the bureau. The public humiliation was complete, but so was the exposure. Samuel Thompson had revealed himself not just to her, but to every witness in that lobby. And though none of them yet knew who Alina Davis truly was, the reckoning had already begun. The hallway leading deeper into the building narrowed into a checkpoint, where another metal detector buzzed faintly with each passerby. Thompson caught up to her before she could proceed. His heavy boots struck the tile with a rhythm meant to intimidate. He raised a hand, halting her just short of the next doorway. "Sit," he ordered, motioning to a row of plastic chairs against the wall. His tone carried the authority of someone who believed the uniform on his back made his word law. Alina paused. For a brief moment, the tension tightened like a noose. She could have kept walking. She had every right, but she understood this was more than a personal challenge. This was a test of how far his contempt would go, and who around him would allow it. Slowly, she turned and lowered herself into the chair. The air smelled faintly of disinfectant. A fluorescent bulb flickered overhead. Across the hall, two analysts clutched coffee cups, pretending not to listen. A receptionist shuffled papers behind her desk, though her eyes darted up every few seconds. Everyone was aware. No one was intervening. Sups? Everyone was Thompson leaned down, placing one hand on the back of the chair beside her. His voice dropped to a low growl. "Don't push me," he said, close enough that she could feel the heat of his breath. "I could make you disappear. Paperwork gets lost, nobody would even ask about you." The words slithered into the air, chilling in their precision. They weren't the empty threats of a man lashing out in anger. They carried the practiced tone of someone who had spoken them before, perhaps even acted on them. Gasps rippled from the analysts nearby. Sharp intakes of breath quickly swallowed back, but their silence remained. No protest, no defense. Only the muted acknowledgement of bystanders unwilling to step into the fire. Alina folded her hands in her lap, her posture calm. She lifted her eyes to meet his, her gaze unshaken. "Is that how you protect this building?" she asked softly, her words edged with steel. Her question unsettled him, though he tried not to show it. His smirk twitched, his jaw tightened. He straightened, towering over her in a stance meant to remind her of his control. But in sitting, Alina had already shifted the balance. She had taken the stage he created and made it her observation point. Her mind catalogued every detail. The humming cameras mounted above the hallway, the timestamp glowing faintly on a monitor, the employees who stood as silent witnesses. She was not simply enduring his abuse, she was documenting it. Every glance, every word, every flicker of power abused was being filed away in her memory with the precision of someone who understood that truth once captured could not be erased. The silence between them stretched. Thompson shifted his weight, the authority he carried a moment ago beginning to tremble beneath the weight of her stillness. "You think you're clever," he said finally, his voice rising enough for those across the hall to hear. "But clever doesn't keep you safe. Around here, people who don't respect the chain of command end up on the wrong side of the door. You want to test me? Go ahead. I'll show you exactly how small you are in this place." His words struck like blows, intended to reduce her to an object of control, but Alina's face remained calm, her expression unreadable. She did not grant him the satisfaction of fear. Instead, she shifted slightly in her chair, crossing one leg over the other, a gesture of patience rather than submission. "You speak with confidence," she replied quietly, for someone who hides behind a desk. The subtle challenge cut deeper than raised voices ever could. Thompson's eyes narrowed, his hand tightening into a fist at his side. He wanted her to flinch, to recoil, to surrender some sliver of her dignity. But she offered nothing of the sort. Across the hall, the analysts exchanged glances. One of them, a man with graying hair, shook his head almost imperceptibly. He knew the danger of the words just spoken. Yet still, his lips remained sealed. The culture of silence held them all in its grip. Alina let her gaze drift to the camera mounted above. She traced its angle, the tiny red light glowing steadily, proof that it was live. She then returned her focus to Thompson. Her silence, her composure, her attention to the details around them made it clear she was not trapped in his stage. She was gathering evidence from within it. Thompson's smirk wavered again. "You don't get it," he said, lowering his voice once more. "In this building, I don't need to raise a hand. One word from me, and you'll be escorted out. No one will remember your name by tomorrow." Alina tilted her head slightly, her voice steady. Then it's fortunate for me that cameras don't forget." The line landed with surgical precision. The receptionist glanced up sharply, her eyes widening. A faint tremor of recognition rippled through the space. Someone was watching. Someone beyond these walls would see. Thompson's posture stiffened. For the first time, he looked less like a predator and more like a man realizing his hunt might have been caught on tape. He masked it quickly, his tone turning gruff, his stance firm. But the moment had already shifted. The threat, though real, now bore the stain of accountability. The tension thickened as Thompson straightened to his full height, towering over her as though size could restore what words had lost. His hand hovered near his radio, his thumb brushing the button, as if daring her to provoke him into using it. Alina sat motionless. Her hands remained folded in her lap, her breathing steady. She scanned the scene again with meticulous care. The flickering light overhead. The faces of the onlookers, now frozen in guilty silence. The faint hum of the ventilation system, carrying every word spoken into the microphones hidden in the ceiling. "You should walk out while you still can," Thompson muttered, his voice low, dangerous. "Because if you stay, I'll bury you in red tape so deep you'll never claw your way out." The words struck the air like poison, but Alina's eyes never left his. "Threats are the weapons of small men," she replied, her tone soft, almost tender, yet devastating in its clarity. For the first time, Thompson blinked. His chest rose and fell faster, his control slipping beneath the weight of her calm. He had sought to intimidate, to strip her of agency. Instead, she had forced him into the light, every threat now echoing into a room that could no longer unhear them. A ripple spread among the witnesses. One of the analysts shifted uncomfortably, her lips parting as though to speak. She closed them again, fear sealing the words. But the silence was no longer complicit. It had become a mirror, reflecting back the ugliness of his abuse. Alina leaned back slightly in her chair, her posture relaxed but her eyes sharp. "You should be careful what promises you make," she said, her voice calm, steady. "Some words cannot be taken back. Some threats cannot be buried." Her statement lingered, hanging heavier than his threats. Thompson clenched his jaw, his face reddening. He had expected compliance, fear, anger, anything but this relentless composure that turned his power against him. The hallway buzzed faintly as another group entered, slowing as they sensed the tension. The crowd of silent witnesses had grown. What began as a moment of intimidation had become a stage for exposure. Alina took note of each new arrival, each new pair of eyes. Witnesses multiplied, and with them, the weight of his actions. He could not erase them all. She was not alone, not truly, and she knew that when the moment came, silence could shift to testimony. Thompson's glare burned into her, but his words faltered. He stepped back, breaking the proximity he had maintained so fiercely. His attempt to dominate had curdled into something else: unease. Alina remained seated, unmoved. Her dignity intact, her memory sharp, her resolve unshaken. She had endured his threat, and in enduring, she had transformed it. What he intended as power now stood as evidence. And though no one else spoke, the truth was clear. The reckoning he had promised for her would come instead for him. The lobby remained heavy with tension. Thompson stood planted like a guard dog, his chest rising and falling with the effort of maintaining his dominance. Alina remained seated, her posture calm, her face unreadable, as though she had accepted the role of a visitor under suspicion, rather than the leader she truly was. Her patience was not surrender, it was calculation. Across the checkpoint, a young uniformed officer named Reynolds shifted uncomfortably. He had only been with the agency for a year, still learning the rhythms of the building and the weight of the badge on his chest. His hands tightened around the clipboard he carried, knuckles whitening as he watched Thompson looming over Alina. Something gnawed at him. It didn't feel right. He cleared his throat, his voice low but audible enough to draw attention. "Maybe we should double-check her credentials, sir, just to be sure." The suggestion was reasonable, even cautious. But Thompson's head whipped around, eyes blazing with a fury that silenced the room. "Back to your post," he snapped, his voice cracking like a whip. Reynolds froze. His mouth closed and he nodded quickly, retreating to the edge of the lobby with his clipboard. His shoulders hunched inward as though trying to make himself invisible. The weight of authority crushed him back into silence. Alina watched the exchange carefully. The crack had appeared, small but telling. Even among the obedient there was doubt. Someone had dared to question Thompson's judgment, and though Reynolds had been silenced, the hesitation lingered, like a shadow across the room. Near the row of chairs, a young analyst named Taylor leaned forward, her eyes flicking nervously between Alina and Thompson. She was in her late 20s, sharp-eyed and observant, her mind trained to spot details others overlooked. Her hands trembled slightly as she clutched a folder to her chest. She knew that face. She had seen it before. Weeks ago, an internal memo had circulated through the office, marked confidential. It included a series of photographs and directives. The Bureau's new director, Alina Davis, would begin conducting unannounced inspections. Taylor had studied that memo carefully, committed the face to memory, and now that same face was sitting quietly in a plastic chair, enduring humiliation at the hands of a man too blind to recognize her. Her heart pounded. She wanted to speak, to say something, anything that might break the charade. But fear tightened its grip around her throat. What if she was wrong? What if Thompson turned his wrath on her next? What if her career ended before it had even begun? So she said nothing. She lowered her eyes to the folder in her hands, clutching it as though it could anchor her against the storm brewing in the lobby. Alina remained still, her silence deliberate. She understood what was happening around her. She had tested enough rooms, walked through enough corridors of power to recognize the signs. People knew, they suspected, but silence was the stronger force in the air. Fear kept their mouths closed tighter than any order Thompson could bark. Thompson paced slowly in front of her, his boots striking the floor with deliberate weight. Each step was meant to remind her that he controlled the tempo of this moment. His glare swept across the room, daring anyone to challenge him. None did. The silence that followed Reynolds's attempt hung heavy, pressing down like a storm cloud no one wanted to acknowledge. Taylor's pulse quickened. She stole another glance at Alina, careful to hide it behind the rim of her folder. There was no mistaking it. The curve of the jawline, the steadiness in the eyes, the quiet confidence in her posture. This was the woman who had stepped into the highest office of the Bureau, and here she sat, playing the role of an unrecognized stranger. Taylor wanted to step forward. She wanted to call her by name, to say, "Director Davis, we know who you are." But the words lodged in her chest like stones. Speaking would mean open defiance of Thompson. Speaking would mean aligning herself against the man who held the keys to her daily survival in this office. The fear was not just for herself. It was for her career, her reputation, the carefully built image she had worked years to create. To be seen as disloyal, as insubordinate, could end everything. Alina caught the analyst's glance. Their eyes met for a fraction of a second. Taylor looked away immediately, but the connection was made. Alina did not move, did not smile, did not acknowledge it openly, but she filed it away. Silent allies existed, even if fear kept them bound. Her strategy was clear. She would play along. Every slight, every insult, every misuse of power was another stone added to the pile she was building silently. Evidence was stronger when it grew without force. She didn't need to expose herself yet. She needed them to show who they were without her prompting. Thompson turned suddenly, his eyes locking on Taylor. "You!" he barked. "What are you staring at? Back to work!" Taylor startled, nearly dropping her folder. She nodded quickly and hurried away, her cheeks burning with shame. Thompson's control reasserted itself, but Alina had already seen the truth. Taylor knew. And when the time came, That knowledge would matter. The lobby settled into uneasy silence once more. The fluorescent light overhead buzzed faintly, its droning hum filling the void that no one dared to break. Thompson folded his arms across his chest, his glare fixed on Alina, as though daring her to flinch. To him, her stillness was a challenge, a silent battle of wills he believed he was destined to win. But Alina did not move. She sat with the composure of someone who had already calculated the outcome long before the first word had been spoken. Every moment of silence was another entry in her ledger, another second of misconduct captured by the cameras mounted discreetly in the corners of the ceiling. Thompson misread her composure entirely. He leaned in close, his breath sharp with coffee and disdain. "You sit there like you've won something," he whispered harshly. "But all you've done is waste my time. Nobody here's going to stand up for you. Nobody ever does." The words were meant to crush, to remind her that this lobby was his domain. But to Alina, they only confirmed what she already knew. He was revealing his own weakness. Only men, unsure of their grip on power, needed to say such things out loud. She let the insult pass through her like wind through trees, unmoved. Instead, she catalogued every detail. The precise angle of his stance, the bitterness in his tone, the way his eyes flickered toward the younger staff, making sure they were still watching, still too afraid to intervene. It was theater, and he was desperate to remain the star. Across the lobby, Reynolds shifted again, his clipboard trembling in his grip. His heart thudded in his chest as he thought about the words he had heard just minutes earlier. "I could make you disappear." They looped in his mind, dark and heavy, the kind of words you didn't expect to hear inside a government building where integrity was supposed to mean something. He wanted to look away, to bury himself in his checklist, but his eyes kept returning to Alina. She wasn't panicking, she wasn't shrinking, she was absorbing everything. And the realization unsettled him more than Thompson's threats. If she wasn't afraid, then why was he? Taylor, seated at her workstation nearby, tapped her pen against the desk in a nervous rhythm that betrayed the storm inside her. She had recognized Alina immediately, and the recognition had left her torn in half. One part of her screamed to act, to speak, to expose Thompson's cruelty for what it was. But the other part, the stronger part, reminded her of the unspoken rules. You don't challenge men like Thompson. You don't make yourself a target. Her eyes lifted once more, locking briefly with Alina's. The connection lasted less than a second, but it was enough. She knew that Alina knew. She could feel the weight of that steady gaze pressing back against her fear, not condemning, but acknowledging. It was as if Alina was telling her silently, "I see you. I see what you are too afraid to say." The tension swelled, wrapping the lobby in invisible chains. Every second of silence pressed harder on the staff who lingered nearby, pretending to work, pretending not to notice. Phones were answered too quickly, keyboards clicked too loudly, as though the noise could disguise their complicity. But every sound only emphasized the truth. The entire room was watching and doing nothing. Alina's patience stretched into that silence. She did not need to break it. The silence itself had become her tool. With each passing moment, Thompson's authority exposed itself not as strength but as control, propped up by fear. Every insult, every barked command, every glare was a reminder that his power existed only so long as others obeyed. Reynolds's chest rose sharply as he swallowed down his guilt. He thought of his training, the endless lectures about integrity, about courage, about standing up for what was right. He thought about why he had joined in the first place, because he believed in protecting people, in making sure the badge meant something more than intimidation. But here he stood, clipboard shaking in his hands, too afraid to speak, watching as someone was degraded in plain view. Taylor pressed her pen to the page, scribbling notes she would not remember later. Her eyes kept drifting back to Alina's hands, folded calmly in her lap, steady, unshaken, the posture of someone who was not merely enduring humiliation but gathering it, turning it into ammunition for something larger. Taylor didn't know what that meant yet, but she felt the tremor of it in her chest. Thompson straightened, pulling back just enough to survey the room again. His smirk returned, thin and sharp. He believed he had won this round. The woman had not moved. The staff had remained silent. Order had been restored. But Alina knew better. His performance was not victory. It was evidence. Every sneer, every whispered threat, every silenced subordinate was another stone in the wall building against him. She had tested this lobby, and the results were clear. Fear ruled here, and where fear ruled, corruption thrived. She inhaled slowly, her expression calm, her voice absent. Not yet, she thought. Not here. This was not the moment to reveal herself. The time would come, and when it did, the silence of today would roar louder than any protest. Around her the silence lingered, heavy and unbroken. But beneath that silence she sensed it, the smallest shift, the faintest tremor. Reynolds's trembling hands, Taylor's darting eyes, the stolen glances of others who couldn't quite look away. Fear still ruled, yes, but somewhere inside that fear, courage had begun to stir. It was buried deep, hesitant and fragile, but it was there. And Alina knew, when the moment came, that fragile courage would be the first crack in Thompson's control. The lobby door shut behind them, and the air changed. Thompson's heavy footsteps echoed against the narrow corridor as he guided Alina toward a dimly lit security office tucked away at the far end. He kept one hand close to her shoulder, not touching, but hovering, as if asserting invisible ownership of the space between them. The fluorescent bulbs above flickered, giving the hallway a faint, uneasy hum. At the end of the hall, he pushed the door open with his badge and gestured her inside. The room was small, almost suffocating, its walls lined with outdated monitors and filing cabinets. A single desk lamp cast a sickly yellow glow that left shadows stretching across the ceiling. Thompson closed the door with deliberate force, the lock snapping shut like a trap. "Sit," he ordered, pointing to a metal chair bolted to the floor. His voice had hardened, no longer meant for show. Out here, away from the eyes of analysts and junior officers, he shed even the thin veneer of professionalism he had clung to in the lobby. This was his true self, unrestrained, venomous, certain of his control. Alina lowered herself into the chair without protest. Her hands rested calmly in her lap, her breathing steady. Every move she made was precise, measured, purposeful. She knew that compliance in this moment was not submission, but strategy. "Phone," he barked, holding out his hand. She reached slowly into her purse and placed the phone in his palm. He smirked as he slipped it into his pocket, unaware that seconds before walking through that door, Alina had already triggered a coded signal to headquarters. The message had gone out quietly, a simple sequence typed into her notes app that would alert her team she was in a hostile encounter. Thompson believed he had disarmed her. In truth, he had only given her more time. The room smelled faintly of stale coffee and dust, the air thick and unmoving. Thompson leaned against the desk, arms crossed, his gaze sharp as a blade. "You think you're clever," he sneered, "but let me tell you something. People who cause trouble in here don't last long. Accidents happen. Paperwork gets misplaced. And nobody ever hears from them again." His words hung heavy in the air, designed to intimidate, to burrow into her thoughts like poison. But Alina did not flinch. Instead, she let his voice echo around the room, her eyes lifting calmly toward the small black dome of the surveillance camera mounted in the corner. The camera's red light blinked faintly, its unblinking lens pointed directly at her. Alina shifted slightly, positioning herself so she sat squarely beneath it. Her back straightened, her chin lifted, and when she spoke, her voice was clear, deliberate, carrying the weight of authority she had concealed until now. "You said," she recited calmly, her eyes never leaving the camera, "that people who cause trouble here have accidents, that their paperwork gets misplaced, and that no one hears from them again." For the first time, Thompson froze. His smirk faltered, his confidence fractured. He turned sharply toward the camera, realizing too late what she had done. She had repeated his threat word for word, placing it on record, imprinting it into the system he had believed would protect him. He stepped forward, his face twisted with sudden panic masked as rage. "You think anyone listens to these tapes? You think anyone cares?" His voice cracked slightly as he shouted, the fear seeping through the anger. Alina remained unmoved. "They will," she said softly, her tone steady, unshaken. "They always do when the truth is spoken clearly." Her calm unnerved him more than any display of defiance could have. He was used to fear, to trembling apologies, to desperate compliance. But Alina was neither afraid nor desperate. She was composed, methodical, a woman who had come prepared not just to survive but to expose. Thompson's jaw clenched as he slammed his fist against the desk, the sound reverberating through the small room. "You don't know how things work here," he growled. "I've been keeping this place in line for 15 years. People respect me, people fear me, and you—" He jabbed a finger at her, his eyes burning with frustration. "You're nothing but another name on a list I control." Alina tilted her head slightly, her gaze steady. "Respect is not fear. Fear is not control, and your list is shorter than you think." Her words sliced through the room like glass. Thompson staggered back a step, her calm dismantling his practiced cruelty. He realized then that this woman was not here by accident. She had walked into his domain with intent, and every moment since had been part of a larger design. Outside the locked door, the building buzzed with routine life, phones ringing, keyboards clacking, voices murmuring. But inside this cramped room, time seemed to slow, the stakes coiling tighter with every exchange. Thompson had cornered her, but in truth, it was he who stood trapped. The silence that followed was suffocating. Thompson's breathing grew heavier, uneven, betraying the storm inside him. He was a man who had built his career on intimidation, who had bent others with threats and force. But now, for the first time, his tactics met an opponent who neither bent nor broke. He moved closer, looming over her, trying to reclaim dominance with sheer presence. "Do you know what happens when someone crosses me?" he hissed. "They disappear. Nobody questions it, nobody investigates, because they all know better." Alina did not lift her gaze from the camera. Her voice remained even. "Say it again," she instructed softly, as though coaxing him to give her more. The demand rattled him. He barked a bitter laugh, leaning back against the desk. "You think you're clever, repeating my words into that camera, but recordings can vanish. Files can be deleted. I have friends who'll make sure of it." Her lips curved into the faintest smile. "And yet you keep talking. Every word you speak digs your own grave deeper. You don't even realize that by now. Your threats are no longer mine to carry. They belong to the record." The weight of her composure pressed against him like a wall. He could feel the edges of his control slipping, the cracks widening. For years he had convinced himself he was untouchable, the unseen gatekeeper of this building. But now, sitting across from him, was someone who refused to play by his rules. She shifted in her seat, her hands still resting calmly in her lap. "You've built a fortress of fear, Thompson. But fear has a short memory, courage lasts longer." He snarled, slamming her phone onto the desk with sudden force. The screen flickered but remained intact, her coded message still hidden deep within it. "You don't know me," he spat. "You don't know what I've done to keep this place in order." Alina's eyes finally left the camera and met his, steady and unyielding. "You're right. I don't know every name you've silenced, every career you've crushed, every life you've tried to erase. But I know enough. And now, so does that camera." The words struck harder than he expected. He felt the walls of the room closing in, the buzzing light overhead drilling into his skull. For the first time, he wondered if the power he wielded so easily in the open lobby could survive here, under the cold, impartial eye of the machine watching above. Alina leaned back slightly, her tone calm, almost conversational. You've mistaken my silence for weakness, but silence is also observation. It is patience. And patience always ends with revelation. The phrase lingered, echoing in the dim room, until it seemed to settle into the very walls. Thompson's fists tightened at his sides, but he didn't strike. Some part of him understood that doing so would seal his fate. Violence could be denied with words, but violence, caught on camera, was undeniable. The balance had shifted. He was no longer the predator in this room, he was the evidence. Alina adjusted her seat one final time, positioning herself so that both her profile and Thompson's looming figure were captured in the same frame. "Go on," she said softly. "Tell me again about the accidents, about the misplaced paperwork, about the silence you think protects you." But Thompson did not answer. His mouth opened, then closed, his fury strangled by the sudden awareness that for the first time in 15 years he was being seen. Not as the enforcer, not as the gatekeeper, but as the liability. And Alina knew then that the test was no longer hers to pass, it was his to fail. In a quiet command center across town, rows of screens glowed against the dimness. It was nearly midnight, but the hum of the FBI never slept. When Alina's coded signal reached the secure line, Deputy Director Harrison was the first to see the alert flash across his monitor. He set his coffee down without touching it again and leaned forward. "Pull up the feed," he ordered, his voice calm but edged with steel. Within seconds, a bank of surveillance streams flickered onto the largest screen in the room. The grainy black-and-white image of the security office appeared, the camera perched in the ceiling capturing Alina seated in the metal chair and Thompson standing above her. Around Harrison, a dozen agents and analysts gathered, drawn in by the urgency of the unfolding scene. Some whispered in disbelief as Thompson's voice carried, faintly through the audio feed, "People who cause trouble in here don't last long," he was saying. "Accidents happen." The room fell into stunned silence. The agents exchanged glances, each recognizing the severity of what they were hearing. To threaten any visitor inside a federal facility was a crime. To threaten their own director was unthinkable. Yet Thompson, blinded by arrogance, had no idea who sat calmly before him. Harrison's jaw tightened. He knew Alina's plan was deliberate. She had chosen not to reveal her identity immediately. She wanted the mask to fall naturally, wanted the record to speak for itself. He respected her strategy, though every instinct in him wanted to storm the building that very second. "Stay on her signal," Harrison instructed firmly. "Do not interfere until she gives us the cue. She's building the case." The team nodded, their faces tense with a mix of outrage and awe. On the screen, Alina's voice rang out clear and measured, repeating Thompson's threats word for word. The agents watched, transfixed, as their director calmly wove a net that Thompson did not even realize he was entangling himself in. The atmosphere in the command center shifted. This was no longer just surveillance. This was witness. They were not just watching Alina. They were watching the end of Thompson's career unfold in real time, and the weight of that moment pressed down on every person in the room. Inside the small office, Thompson continued to pace, his movements sharp and restless. He had no idea that his words were being carried across encrypted channels to the highest levels of the Bureau. He believed the locked door meant privacy, believed the camera was nothing more than a silent tool he controlled. Alina remained centered in her chair, her gaze fixed firmly on the lens above. Every sentence she spoke was a deliberate act, every repetition a calculated strike. She was no longer speaking only to the man in front of her. She was speaking to the dozens of ears tuned into her voice, to the officials who now understood the depth of rot festering inside their walls. Deputy Director Harrison folded his arms as he listened. He had known Thompson's reputation for years, whispers of heavy-handed discipline and buried complaints. But reputation had always been smoke, elusive, difficult to pin down. Tonight, Alina had pulled back the curtain. Smoke had become flame. undeniable and consuming. On the monitors, Thompson leaned closer, his voice dropping into a harsh whisper. "You think you can outlast me? You don't know who protects me. There are people above me who make sure nothing sticks. You won't even get a hearing." The agents in the command center stirred, muttering under their breath. They recognized the pattern. Thompson was not acting alone. His words hinted at a network, a protection ring woven through the bureaucracy. It was a chilling confirmation of suspicions long harbored but rarely spoken aloud. Alina answered evenly, her tone unwavering. "Every word you say is not mine to carry. It belongs to the record, and the record has longer memory than you imagine." The silence after her words stretched long, punctuated only by the static hum of the feed. Harrison allowed himself a small nod. She was not just surviving the moment. She was constructing the evidence, brick by brick, with a clarity that could not be denied. In the command center, one analyst whispered what others were thinking. "He doesn't even realize who she is." And that was the truth that made the moment all the more electric. Thompson believed he was cornering a stranger. In reality, he was humiliating the director of the FBI under the watch of her own people, his downfall unfolding in the most public private room imaginable. The air inside the office grew heavy with the weight of his own threats. Thompson's eyes darted between Alina and the door, as though sensing some shift he couldn't explain. Still, his pride refused to yield. He leaned closer, crowding the space, his voice laced with menace. "You'll regret coming here. I'll make sure of it." Across town, Harrison's fists clenched at his sides. He forced himself to remain still. Alina had prepared for this. To move too soon would rob her of the victory she was constructing. Alina lifted her chin, her voice carrying steady authority. "Regret is for those who hide. I don't hide. I endure, I record, and I reveal." The agents watching leaned forward as her words filled the room. It was not only defiance, it was testimony. Each sentence carried weight, a nail in the coffin of Thompson's authority. For Thompson, the words stung more than any raised voice. He was used to anger, to shouting matches he could control by turning the volume higher. But calm dismantled him. Calm forced him to hear himself, to see the cracks widening around him. He snarled, slamming his hand against the wall. "You think anyone will believe you?" "They already do," she answered simply, her eyes flicking toward the camera once more. And at that moment, the truth struck him like a blow. The camera was not his shield, it was hers. His threats, his arrogance, his every word had been preserved beyond his reach. The realization rippled through his posture. His shoulders sagged for a fraction of a second, his bravado slipping like a mask too heavy to keep holding. But pride clawed back, forcing him upright again. "Even if they watch, I have friends who'll bury this, people who owe me." In the command center, Harrison exchanged a grim look with his team. Thompson's confession was both dangerous and invaluable. If he was telling the truth, the rot spread higher than they feared. But if he was bluffing, his desperation revealed just how much he already knew. The walls were closing in. Alina's eyes narrowed, her voice steady. "Friends who protect corruption will not shield you forever. Truth has longer reach than loyalty born of fear." Her words pierced the air, quiet but sharp, and the agents watching felt the shift. This was not just a confrontation in a small office. It was a trial, one man's legacy of fear unraveling under the gaze of witnesses he could not see. Thompson stepped back, the silence pressing heavier now than his threats ever had. He glanced once at the camera, and for the first time, a flicker of doubt crossed his face. He muttered under his breath, too low for the microphone to catch. But Alina did not let it pass. "Say it clearly," she prompted, her tone almost gentle. "Let the record hear you." He froze, realizing she was not fighting him. She was drawing him out, pulling every dangerous word from his mouth until the record itself would convict him. In the command center, an analyst whispered, "She's turning him into his own witness." Harrison allowed himself the faintest nod. "And his own executioner," he said quietly. On the screen, Alina adjusted her posture once more, calm and resolute. She was not merely enduring Thompson's threats, she was dismantling them, piece by piece, while the unseen building of witnesses held its collective breath. And though Thompson still believed he held the lock and the key, every second ticked him closer to the moment he would discover he had never been in control at all. The silence in the cramped office thickened, until Thompson could no longer bear it. His pride demanded action, something to reassert control. He reached into a drawer, pulled out a thin folder, and slapped it onto the desk in front of Alina. The sound echoed sharply off the metal walls. "Sign this," he ordered, his voice low and biting. "It's a statement confirming you attempted to access restricted files without clearance. Once your name is on it, you're blacklisted from every federal facility in the country. Your career, your credibility, all gone." Alina looked down at the folder, then slowly back up at him. Her expression never wavered. She did not even reach for the pen he had slid across the desk. "I will not sign a lie," she said, her tone measured, calm but firm. The defiance seemed to ignite something in him. Thompson's jaw tightened as his eyes flashed with irritation. He leaned closer, his voice turning sharp. "Do you understand what happens to people who refuse me? You'll be erased. One signature saves you years of misery." Alina folded her hands neatly on the desk, refusing to be moved. "You cannot erase truth. No paper will protect you from it." Her refusal struck him harder than if she had shouted. Rage simmered beneath his skin, and in a petty act of dominance he reached for his cup of coffee. With deliberate slowness, he tipped it forward, spilling the dark liquid across the table and onto her blouse. The hot liquid spread in uneven streaks, staining the fabric. A twisted smirk crept across his face as he set the empty cup down. "Oops," he muttered. "Accidents happen." For the first time, a flicker of disgust flashed across the faces of the analysts in the command center watching the feed. Threats were one thing, but this was humiliation for its own sake, a cruelty stripped of purpose. They shifted uncomfortably, their eyes narrowing, as the man they were sworn to serve alongside revealed the smallness of his power. Alina did not flinch. She rose slightly, dabbing at the stain with the edge of her sleeve, then straightened again, her eyes fixed on the camera above. "The record shows who acts with dignity," she said quietly, "and who does not." Thompson felt her words digging under his skin like needles. His attempt to degrade her had not drawn fear, only quiet condemnation. That silence burned hotter than any outburst. He turned away, rifling through the drawer for another document, the restless movements of a man who sensed control slipping away. The door creaked suddenly, and an office manager stepped in hesitantly. He was a middle-aged man with tired eyes, his hands clutching a clipboard against his chest. "Sir," he began cautiously, "I heard raised voices. Is everything all right in here?" Alina turned her head slightly, meeting the man's gaze. For a fleeting second, his expression shifted as if he recognized something in her face. Perhaps it was the authority in her posture, perhaps the calm resilience that radiated even under duress. But before he could speak further, Thompson barked out an order. "Back to your desk, Jenkins," he snapped, his tone sharp enough to slice the air. "This is official business, above your pay grade. You'll do well to forget you saw anything at all." Jenkins hesitated, his eyes flicked between Alina and Thompson. The weight of his conscience pressed heavily against the command he had just received. But fear, old and familiar, won out. He lowered his gaze, muttered a soft apology, and slipped out the door, closing it quietly behind him. Thompson exhaled sharply, satisfied with the retreat. "See? No one will help you. Even if they suspect, they won't speak. They know better." Alina watched him steadily. "They know fear," she corrected, her voice even. "But fear fades when truth is exposed. One day, even the silent will speak." The agents in the command center exchanged looks. The words struck home. Many of them had felt that same silence, that same pressure to conform, to avoid making waves. To hear their director put words to it now was both unsettling and inspiring. Thompson, blind to the resonance of her words, pressed harder. He shoved the fabricated paperwork across the desk once more. "Sign. Do it now. Save yourself the trouble. Nobody will believe otherwise." Alina's hand hovered for a moment, not over the pen, but above the paper. Then she pushed it back across the desk. Her voice cut through the thick air. "The only signature here will be yours, written across the record of your arrogance." The room seemed to shrink as the tension thickened. Thompson's bravado faltered, replaced with a frantic need to reclaim control. He snatched the papers back, crumpling them in his fist, and hurled them into the trash can. His breathing grew shallow, uneven, betraying the storm of panic rising beneath the mask of authority. Alina sat unmoved, her posture straight, her blouse still damp with coffee. She looked every bit the figure of unshakable calm, her voice steady. When authority collapses, it does not do so quietly. It crumbles loudly, with witnesses. Her words lingered in the air like an indictment. Thompson slammed his palm onto the desk, his voice trembling with rage. "You don't get it, do you? I am the authority here. My word decides what becomes of you." In the command center, Harrison's eyes narrowed as he leaned closer to the screen. "And with every word, he writes his own downfall," he murmured. The analysts around him nodded grimly. They were no longer just observers, they were jurors, witnessing a trial unfold before their eyes. Inside the office, Thompson's desperation twisted into cruelty. He yanked open a file cabinet, pulling out more documents, shoving them across the desk one after another. "Sign these too. Sign them all. Prove your compliance. Or I'll bury you so deep even your family won't remember you existed." Alina glanced at the stack without touching it. Her voice remained even, her words chosen with care. "Burial is not the same as silence. The record speaks, even from the grave. And I do not fear being remembered for resistance." Her calm tone clashed violently against his fury. For the first time, his hands trembled slightly as he tried to hold the papers steady. The camera captured every detail, the stain on her blouse, the sweat forming on his brow, the papers littering the desk like evidence of his unraveling. The agents in the command center sat in quiet awe. They could feel the collapse unfolding, a man of supposed power dismantling himself piece by piece, every action documented, every threat preserved. And through it all, Alina remained steady, not as a victim, but as a witness, writing his final chapter in real time. The silence that followed was heavier than any words spoken. Thompson stood breathing hard, his chest rising and falling like a man drowning in his own arrogance. Alina leaned back slightly, her eyes never leaving his face. "Authority is not what you take," she said softly. "It is what you earn, and yours is gone." Her words landed like the final strike of a gavel. Across town, the command center was silent. Every agent knew they had just witnessed the moment his authority truly collapsed. The cameras had captured it all: the threats, the humiliation, the fabricated lies, and now the unraveling silence. Thompson, oblivious to how complete his undoing already was, clenched his fists tighter, still clinging to power that had already slipped through his hands. But the building was watching, and so was the record. The muffled wail of sirens grew louder outside the federal building, echoing up the narrow street until they cut sharply as patrol cars screeched to a stop. Flashing red and blue lights bled through the blinds of the small security office. Thompson straightened, finally feeling his moment of triumph. He had made the call minutes earlier, his voice dripping with urgency as he described an intruder attempting to compromise national security. Now, with the sound of heavy boots pounding through the hall, he believed he was about to seal Alina's fate. "Perfect timing," he muttered, smirking as he adjusted his tie. "You'll see just how quickly the law bends when I pull the strings." Alina remained seated, her calm presence unshaken. She dabbed once more at the stain on her blouse, then folded her hands neatly in her lap. Her eyes flicked briefly toward the door, where shadows moved beneath the frame, then returned to Thompson's face. "You mistake noise for power," she said evenly. The door burst open. 2 uniformed local officers stepped inside, hands already hovering over their holsters. Behind them trailed a sergeant with a hardened face, his brow furrowed, as if he already carried doubts about this call. Thompson, however, wasted no time. He strode forward with mock authority, gesturing toward Alina. "That's her," he announced, his voice loud and clear. "Attempted breach of classified files. I caught her red-handed. You'll want to take her into custody immediately. Dangerous type, knows how to manipulate, handle with care." The officers glanced at Alina, then back at Thompson. The sergeant lifted a hand, signaling them to wait. Something in her composure seemed out of place for a suspect. She did not flinch, did not argue, did not beg. She simply sat, steady and unafraid. It unsettled him. Still, Thompson pressed. "Don't just stand there. Put her in cuffs. This woman is finished." The officers hesitated. They had responded to plenty of calls, but rarely had they seen an alleged suspect sit so quietly, as if she were the one in control. The sergeant's instincts pricked at him, telling him the story was incomplete. He opened his mouth to question, but before he could, another sound sliced through the charged silence. The sharp command of polished shoes against tile, the steady, purposeful rhythm of men and women who walked with authority born from years of command. And then, the door swung wide again. Deputy Director Harrison entered first, his tall frame filling the doorway, followed by a team of federal agents whose dark suits and quiet precision radiated unmistakable power. The air shifted immediately, conversations halted, even the local officers instinctively straightened, recognizing authority that needed no explanation. Harrison's eyes swept the room once, taking in the spilled coffee, the wrinkled papers on the desk, and finally Thompson's smug expression. He didn't speak right away. Silence itself became a weapon, pressing down on the man who only moments ago thought himself victorious. Thompson chuckled, trying to mask the unease creeping into his chest. "Deputy Director," he greeted, pretending warmth. "Perfect timing. I've just apprehended a hostile operative attempting to infiltrate secure systems. We need to process her immediately before she causes further damage." Harrison raised an eyebrow but said nothing. He glanced back at his agents, then forward again, letting Thompson's words hang heavy in the air. The smugness began to falter. "I have the paperwork to prove it," Thompson continued, his voice rushing now, desperate to fill the silence. He gestured toward the trash can where the crumpled forms lay. "Fabrication attempts, unauthorized access, it's all there. She resisted, refused to sign, of course, but I made sure to detain her properly. You can thank me later." One of Harrison's agents bent and retrieved the balled-up papers, smoothing them out on the desk. The fraudulent language scrawled across them was plain to see. The agent said nothing, simply laid the sheets flat in front of Harrison. Finally, Harrison turned to Thompson, his voice measured but laced with steel. "Officer," he said slowly, "have you ever met FBI Director Alina Davis?" The words detonated like thunder in the room. For a heartbeat, silence reigned. The local officers froze, their eyes darting in disbelief between Harrison and Alina. The sergeant's hand dropped from his holster as his brow furrowed deeper. His instincts had been right all along. Thompson blinked, confusion flickering across his face before giving way to denial. He let out a forced laugh. "You must be joking. Her? She's some nobody I caught trying to—" Harrison stepped aside slightly, his gaze shifting to Alina. She rose slowly, the quiet grace of her movements commanding more authority than any raised voice could. Her blouse still bore the coffee stain, yet in that moment it looked less like humiliation and more like a badge of survival. The entire office seemed to hold its breath as Alina straightened to her full height. Her hand extended toward the desk where her confiscated phone sat. Without asking permission, she picked it up, sliding it calmly into her pocket. Her eyes never left Thompson's face. "I am Director Alina Davis," she said clearly, each word sharp and undeniable. "And you have just ensured that every second of your arrogance will be remembered." The local officers shifted uncomfortably, their postures snapping to attention. The sergeant removed his cap, his jaw tightening as he realized the enormity of what had just been revealed. The agents flanking Harrison remained silent, but their presence alone made the truth unassailable. Thompson staggered back a step, his mouth opening and closing without sound. The color drained from his face as the walls he had built around himself crumbled in an instant. He tried to laugh again, but the sound was hollow, brittle. This is some kind of trick," he stammered. "She's lying. She can't be." Harrison's voice cut him off like a blade. "Every agent in this building has been watching you, Officer Thompson. Every insult, every threat, every false report. Your career ended the moment you opened your mouth." Thompson looked wildly around the room, as if searching for someone to support his claim, someone to restore his illusion of control. But the local officers had stepped back, their expressions cold. Jenkins, the office manager, had crept back to the doorway, his face pale as he witnessed the reversal. No one moved to stand beside Thompson. Alina took one step closer, her voice steady but unyielding. "You tried to reduce me to paperwork. You tried to humiliate me, silence me, erase me. But authority cannot be stolen. It reveals itself in moments like this. And today, the record shows exactly who you are." Her words hung in the air like a verdict. The stain on her blouse no longer mattered. The humiliation he thought permanent now clung only to him. Thompson's hands trembled. His smirk had vanished, replaced by a hollow stare, as if he were seeing his own downfall reflected in her eyes. The silence of the room was no longer his to command. It belonged to her. What followed was not loud, not chaotic. It was quiet, the kind of quiet that shatters illusions. Thompson stood frozen, stripped of every ounce of borrowed power, while Alina turned and addressed the officers. "Thank you for responding," she said simply, her tone calm, respectful. "Your services are no longer required." The sergeant gave a stiff nod, signaling his team to withdraw. None of them looked back at Thompson. Their footsteps faded down the hall until only the hum of the overhead lights remained. Alina adjusted her blouse, lifted her chin, and faced Harrison. The faintest hint of relief softened her expression. The truth had detonated. The mask had been ripped away, and though Thompson still stood in the room, he was already gone, reduced to nothing more than the record of his own disgrace. The silence that lingered after the reveal pressed down like a storm about to break. Thompson's swagger had vanished, replaced by trembling hands and darting eyes. He opened his mouth as if to speak, but the words caught in his throat, strangled by the weight of his exposure. Alina stood firm in the center of the room, no longer a victim of his arrogance, but the embodiment of authority itself. She fixed her gaze on him, her voice calm yet sharp enough to pierce through the haze of denial that clung to him. "You humiliated a citizen without cause. You falsified paperwork to cover your lies. You abused the authority given to you to serve the public, twisting it into a weapon to intimidate and degrade. Every action you took tonight violated not just me, but the oath you swore when you put on that badge." Each word struck like a hammer. Thompson flinched, but tried to rally, clutching at excuses. I was just following procedure," he muttered, his voice cracking under the strain. "You don't understand the pressure I'm under. Mistakes happen." Alina cut him off. "This was not a mistake. Mistakes are unintentional. What you did was deliberate, calculated, and repeated. You weren't protecting this building. You were protecting your ego." The agents shifted slightly around Harrison, who stepped forward, his expression stern. From his jacket pocket, he pulled a small recorder and pressed play. The office filled with Thompson's own voice, cold and cruel, recorded in crystal clarity. People like you disappear, the recording hissed, echoing back with undeniable proof of the threat he had spat at Alina earlier. The sound hit Thompson like a physical blow. He shook his head violently. That's taken out of context. I didn't mean... But the words betrayed him. The officers who had remained in the doorway stiffened, their jaws tightening. The sergeant, still standing a step back, gave a slow shake of his head, his eyes filled with disgust. Harrison snapped the recorder shut. You used intimidation as policy. That is not context. That is corruption. Thompson's knees threatened to buckle beneath him, but he gripped the edge of the desk, clinging to the last fragments of control. His eyes flicked to Alina, silently begging for reprieve. But what stared back at him was not mercy, it was truth. Alina moved closer, her presence filling the room with steady power. She stopped only a few feet from him, her tone deliberate, ensuring every person present heard her words. You didn't just fail me, she began, her voice cutting through the thick air. You failed every citizen who walks through these doors expecting fairness. You turned a place meant for justice into a stage for your cruelty. You made yourself the measure of the law instead of the law itself. Thompson shook his head, desperation rising. You don't understand. You think this is easy? Day after day, people trying to get past me, pushing, questioning. I have to keep control or I lose respect. If I look weak, I can't do my job. Alina's eyes narrowed. Respect is not taken through fear. It is earned through integrity, and every choice you made tonight proved you never understood that. Harrison gestured to two agents. They stepped forward, their movements quiet but unrelenting. One reached for Thompson's shoulder, while the other extended a hand. Thompson resisted instinctively, jerking back. Wait, you can't do this. You don't know what this will do to my record. To my family. I've given years of service. I don't deserve to be treated like a criminal. The agent's hand hovered inches from his badge. Thompson clutched at it protectively, like a drowning man clinging to driftwood. His voice cracked. Please, I just got carried away. It wasn't supposed to go this far. I was under pressure. Alina spoke again, her voice firm but without cruelty. Every person who ever stood in front of you was under pressure too. They were citizens facing the power of the state, and you treated them as enemies. What you feel now is only a fraction of what you made others endure. The agent's fingers closed around the badge pinned to Thompson's chest. With a slow, deliberate motion, it was unfastened and pulled free. The metallic clink of separation echoed in the room, louder than any gavel. Thompson's breath came ragged. His chest heaved as though the removal had torn something deeper than fabric. The badge had been his shield, his excuse, his identity. Without it, he looked smaller, diminished. He reached out a trembling hand as if to take it back, but the agent tucked it firmly away. For the first time, Thompson realized that his authority had never truly belonged to him. The humiliation hung in the air like smoke. Thompson's mouth opened again, but no coherent words emerged. Excuses stumbled out, fractured and hollow. I only did what I thought was right. You have to believe me, I didn't mean harm. I was just doing my job, the way I was taught. Alina tilted her head slightly, her expression unreadable but her eyes unwavering. If this is what you were taught, then you should have unlearned it the moment you saw the harm it caused. Authority is not blind repetition. It demands accountability. You ignored that because it was easier to feed your pride than to honor your oath. The office manager, Jenkins, who had remained on the sidelines, finally found his voice. I've seen it, he whispered, his voice trembling. The way he treats people, the threats, the paperwork he makes us file to cover for him. I was too afraid to speak before. His words cracked under guilt, but they carried the strength of truth. The sergeant folded his arms, his jaw set. We respond to calls in good faith, trusting the information we're given. If that information is corrupted, we become pawns. Tonight, you tried to use us as tools in your game. That ends now. Thompson's face collapsed further under the weight of their words. He looked around wildly, searching for an ally, but found none. Even the walls seemed to close in on him, watching as if to bear witness. Harrison's voice came last, resolute and final. "You didn't just abuse your power, Thompson. You betrayed it. And betrayal has consequences." The agent stepped behind him. No handcuffs yet, but their presence was undeniable. He was no longer in command. He was a man awaiting judgment. Alina took a final step forward. Her voice, steady and deliberate, carried the resonance of truth that could not be ignored. "You believed humiliation was power. You believed threats were protection. You believed lies were shield enough. But power rooted in fear always collapses. And tonight, every word you spoke will be remembered. Not as authority, but as evidence." Her words fell like the closing of a case. Thompson sagged, his shoulders slumped, the fight drained from him. He no longer looked like an officer. He looked like a man stripped bare, facing the very system he thought he controlled. He rose. The room grew still again, but this time it was not silence born of tension. It was silence born of certainty. Thompson's career had ended. His name would not be carried forward as a protector of justice, but as a warning of what happens when arrogance corrodes duty. Alina turned toward Harrison, nodding once. He returned the gesture, his expression grim but resolved. The agents began to guide Thompson away, his protests fading into the hallway like echoes of a man already forgotten. In the office, Alina stood tall, her presence reclaiming the space he had poisoned. She touched the pocket where her phone rested, feeling its weight, not as a device, but as a reminder. Truth had prevailed, and accountability had spoken. The reckoning was complete.